He realized the mistake when she looked up and smiled anyway. It was that simple, that jarring. For a frantic 5 minutes, Mark had been one of the parents caught in the postricidal chaos, a sea of identical pink tutus, tiny ballet buns, and flushed, excited faces. He'd scanned the crowd, spotted a familiar shock of bright red hair, and called out, "Lily." "Time to go, sweetie." The little girl had turned, and he'd scooped her up, her tiny hand automatically finding his. He'd navigated the throng, chattering about her plies and the big finale, how proud he was, and she'd just nodded, a small, warm weight against his shoulder. It wasn't until they were at the car, the parking lot lights casting long shadows, that he set her down to buckle her in. She turned to face him, and the smile she gave him was wide, trusting, but utterly unfamiliar. The eyes weren't Lily's mischievous hazel. They were a deep, placid blue. The sprinkle of freckles across her nose was missing. This was not his daughter. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through him. He looked at the little girl, then back towards the brightly lit doors of the community center, his heart hammering against his ribs. Where was Lily, and whose child was this, smiling up at him as if he were the center of her universe? His first instinct was to run back inside, screaming Lily's name. But he couldn't just leave this little girl alone in a dark parking lot. Ick knelt on, trying to keep his voice steady. "Hi there," he said, forcing a smile. "I think there's been a little mix-up. What's your name?" She looked at him, her blue eyes wide, and simply said, "Poppy." No fear, no confusion. Just Poppy. "Okay, Poppy," Mark said, his mind racing. "Where's your daddy?" She pointed a tiny finger, nodded the community center. Bot had a beat-up blue sedan at the far end of the lot. A man was leaning against it, head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Mark's blood ran cold. He recognized that posture. It was the same despair he'd felt just moments ago. He took Poppy's hand, which she gave him without hesitation, and they started walking towards the man. Every step felt a mile long. What was he going to say? "Hi, I accidentally took your kid." As they got closer, the man looked up. His face was pale, his eyes frantic, and then he saw them. Relief washed over his features so intensely it was almost painful to watch. At the exact same moment, the doors to the center burst open, and a woman ran out, her voice cracking as she called a name. "Poppy!" Behind her, holding her hand, was a little girl with a shock of bright red hair. Lily. Lily saw him, and her face broke into a huge grin. "Daddy, we were looking for you." She ran towards him, and the other man, Poppy's dad, scooped up his own daughter, burying his face in her hair. For a moment, the two fathers just stood there, clutching their children. Two strangers, bound by a shared 5 minutes of absolute terror. Mark looked at Poppy's dad, whose name he'd later learn was Tom, and they exchanged a look. No words were needed. It was a look of profound understanding, of shared panic and overwhelming gratitude. In that chaotic parking lot, amidst the lingering scent of hairspray and the echoes of children's laughter, two families had briefly, terrifyingly, swapped places. The swap was simple. Mark and Tom had sons in the same soccer league, and wives who had become friends. But the men themselves, they were just Lily's dad and Poppy's dad. They'd wave at pickups, exchange polite nods at birthday parties. They existed in the same orbit, but never truly connected. That night changed everything. The following Saturday, Mark found himself inviting Tom and his family over for a barbecue. It felt necessary. They needed to put a real connection to the faces they'd almost lost. The wives, Sarah and Chloe, thought it was a great idea. The girls, Lily and Poppy, were already best friends and were ecstatic. The barbecue was awkward at first. The men hovered around the grill, making small talk about the weather and lawn care. But then Tom, holding a beer, looked at Mark and said, "You know, for a second there I thought I'd lost my mind. I saw you walk away with her, and my brain just couldn't process it. It was like watching a movie of my worst nightmare." Mark stopped flipping a burger and nodded, the memory still raw. "I know," he said quietly, when she smiled at me, and it wasn't Lily's smile. My whole world just stopped. And just like that, the dam broke. They talked for hours. Not just about that night, but about everything. About the pressures of fatherhood, the anxieties that keep them up at night, the overwhelming love for their kids that is both a strength and a terrifying vulnerability. It turned out they had more in common than they ever could have imagined. They both had a secret passion for building ridiculously complex Lego sets. They both had a favorite terrible action movie from the 90s they could quote word for word. They discovered a shared history of failed garage bands and questionable fashion choices in their youth. Sarah and Chloe watched from the porch, smiling. "I've never seen Mark open up to anyone like that," Sarah whispered. Chloe nodded. "Tom either. He's always so guarded." The kids, oblivious to the adult drama, were chasing each other around the yard, their laughter the soundtrack to this new beginning. That terrifying mix-up, that moment of pure parental dread, had accidentally unlocked a friendship that would become one of the most important in both their lives. Over the next few years, the two families became inseparable. They weren't just the soccer friends anymore. They were the ones you called when your car broke down, when you needed someone to watch the kids last minute, when you just needed to vent to another dad who got it. They celebrated holidays together, vacationed together, and supported each other through job losses and health scares. Mark and Tom built a workshop in Tom's garage, a sanctuary filled with sawdust and the shared satisfaction of creating something with their own hands. They coached the girls' soccer team together, a perfect combination of Mark's strategic mind and Tom's endless enthusiasm. The girls, Lily and Poppy, grew up like sisters. Their bond forged in the innocent confusion of a dance recital and solidified over countless sleepovers and shared secrets. One evening, years later, the four adults were sitting on Mark's patio, watching the now teenage Lily and Poppy teaching Mark's young son how to kick a soccer ball. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple. Tom took a sip of his drink and looked over at Mark. "You ever think about that night?" he asked, his voice soft. Mark smiled, a real, easy smile. "All the time," he said. "Best mistake I ever made." He thought about the man he was before, a good father, a good husband, but walled off, isolated in his own little bubble of responsibility. That night had cracked the bubble open. It had forced him to connect, to be vulnerable, and in doing so, had made his world so much bigger, so much reshare. It was a strange and terrifying path to friendship, born from a parent's worst fear. But looking at his family, his real family, the one that had grown to include Tom, Chloe, and Poppy, he wouldn't have traded it for anything.